Hey, my name is Theo Lang. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a locksmith in Saltbrook, Maine, a harbor town where the fog comes in twice a day like a tide of its own. I have a narrow little shop on Harbor Street with a workbench, a wall of brass blanks, and a cat named Deadbolt who came with the building and has never once caught a mouse. I open doors for a living. Locked out tourists, jammed church vestries, rusted padlocks on boat sheds, widows who can't get into a husband's old toolbox and need someone patient about it. 10,000 doors, give or take, in 15 years. Other people's doors. That's the joke I never say out loud, the one I keep filed where I keep everything. I've spent my whole life opening doors for other people and standing politely outside. Here's the short version of why. When I was 19, my parents went out for their anniversary dinner, and a drunk driver came home instead of them. I had a brother who was 11 and a sister who was 9, and we had exactly one relative, a great aunt in Arizona, who sent a card. So I came home from my first year of architecture school in Boston, and I never went back. I apprenticed with old Gus Lingfist, the locksmith, because it was steady and it was here, and I learned to cook from a library book. And I sat through parent-teacher conferences where the teachers were older than me, and I taught 2 kids to drive, to shave, to dance badly, to fill out a FAFSA. People in town still call what I did heroic sometimes, in the grocery line, and I never know where to put my face. It wasn't heroic. It was Tuesday, 4,000 times in a row. It worked, is the thing. Sam's an engineer in Denver. Katie's a nurse in Portland, married, a baby on the way. They call every Sunday. The house got quiet in stages, the way a tide goes out, and one ordinary morning 2 years ago I woke up at 5:40 out of habit, with nobody left to make breakfast for, and I lay there doing the math. 34 years old. I had raised my family already. It was over, and somehow I'd never started. So the shop, the fog, Deadbolt. A man can build a decent life out of routine and brass shavings, and I want to be fair to that life, because I wasn't unhappy in it. I was just aware, the way you're aware of weather in your knee, that every door I owned had been shut a long time. Next door to my shop for the last 3 years has been a flower shop called Whitlock and Fern. It's the prettiest thing on Harbor Street, which is not a competitive category since the rest of us are a bait shop, a notary, and me. Buckets of dahlias on the sidewalk in summer. Paper whites in the window in January, out of spite at the weather. And running the place, alone, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, is Iris Whitlock. I'm going to try to describe Iris the way I'd describe her to a stranger, and not the way I came to think of her, which would embarrass us both. She's 33. Dark auburn hair the color of cherry wood, usually pinned up with whatever was closest, a pencil. Once a cinnamon stick, I asked. Blue eyes that are pale and serious until she laughs, and then they're not serious at all. There's a smudge of green on her somewhere at all times. Stem sap. It never fully washes out. She says florist's tattoo. She talks to the flowers when she thinks no one's in the shop. Not cute talk. Logistics. You'll hold until Thursday, and that's an order. For 3 years, we were neighbors the way shopkeepers are. I fixed her ancient back door the first winter, the one that swelled shut every nor'easter, and she paid me in coffee and an opinion about my window display, which was that I didn't have one, which was true. And the next week she built me one, brass keys hung on fishing line at different heights like a school of minnows, and tourists started coming in just to photograph it. We shared a wall and a dumpster and 1,000 small mornings. Her unlocking at 7, me at 8, the nod, the weather report, the gossip about the bait shop's ongoing seagull war. On Valentine's Day, her one brutal day, I'd bring sandwiches at 2 o'clock because I'd learned in year 1 that otherwise she didn't eat. On the anniversary of my parents, every June, without ever being told the date, she somehow always had a reason to bring me something that smelled alive. I knew I was in trouble the morning I caught myself cutting a key blank to brass scrap. No order, no customer, just to have something for my hands while I thought about whether she'd laughed at my joke earlier or at the seagull. A man who has raised children knows how to interrogate his own motives. I sat myself down, had the talk, and ruled it out. She was 33 and lovely and knee-deep in her own life. I was the quiet neighbor with a cat named after hardware. There are men who hear a closed door and have to rattle it. I have too much respect for doors. So that was us. 3 years. And then came the second Tuesday of last September. I was closing up, 6:15, fog coming in off the water in ropes, when I heard it through our shared wall. Not crying exactly. The aftermath of crying, that ragged, careful breathing of somebody reassembling themselves. Then her back door, the one I'd fixed, opening and closing. I came out with the trash as cover, the world's oldest excuse, and found Iris Whitlock sitting on the back step of her own shop in the fog, holding a thick cream-colored envelope the way you'd hold a court summons. "Theo," she said, and tried to make her voice do its normal thing, and it didn't. "Tell me something about locks. Anything. I need my head somewhere else for a minute." So I sat down on the step, a polite distance, and told her about the oldest lock ever found, the wooden pin lock from the ruins of Nineveh, 4,000 years old, and how the basic idea hasn't changed since, pins and a key, and how I find that comforting, that people have always had things worth keeping and have always, eventually, let somebody in. She listened with her eyes closed. The fog moved through the alley like it was looking for an address. "My parents are having their 40th anniversary," she said finally. 3 weeks from Saturday. At the house in Kennebunk. Command performance. Black tie, a tent on the lawn, 140 people. She turned the envelope over. "And I have to bring my husband. I am not a fast man, but I do precise work. I didn't know you were married." "I'm not." She laughed. "One note, no floor under it. That's the thing, Theo. I'm not married. I invented him." And out it came, on the back step, in the fog, the whole architecture of it. The Whitlocks of Kennebunk. Her father, the Honorable Edward Whitlock, retired Superior Court Judge, a man who cross-examines the weather. Her mother, Bitsy, who has chaired every board in southern Maine and rates her children like hotels. Her sister Vivian, cardiac surgeon, married to Charles, corporate counsel, 2 children who play competitive chess. Her brother Webb, who does something in Boston with other people's money and calls it grueling. And Iris, who got into law school because that's what Whitlocks do and walked out in her second year because she'd realized, in the middle of a contracts lecture, that she'd been planting other people's gardens in the margins of her notes for 18 months. Who took her grandmother's small inheritance and opened a flower shop in a fishing town and built it, alone, into a thing that pays its bills and employs 2 college kids in summer and makes Harbor Street prettier than it has any right to be. And whose family for 8 years has referred to all of it, the shop, the town, the life, as Iris's little detour. At Thanksgiving, her father proposes a toast to our successes and our Iris. Her mother sends her listings for condos in Portland near, quote, suitable men. Vivian once introduced her at a charity auction as my sister, the one who arranges flowers, in the tone you'd use for a sister who arranges fires. Last year at my cousin's wedding, Iris said they put me at the singles table. I'm 32 years old at the time, I own a business, and I'm seated with a 19-year-old and a divorced uncle nobody monitors. And at the reception, my mother stands up and makes a toast about how she's still praying for, direct quote, somebody to finally choose our Iris. Her hands were very still on the envelope, which is how I knew. And everyone laughed, Theo. Kindly. That kind laugh. And I stood up and I heard myself say, actually, somebody has. I'm married. We eloped in the spring. He couldn't be here, he's working. The fog horn, out on the point went, low and patient. "A year," she said. "I've kept him alive a year. He travels, my husband. He's shy of cameras. He's a craftsman. I said that part because it was the opposite of what they wanted. I wanted him to have hands my father couldn't argue with. And it worked. It bought me a year of peace. My mother stopped sending listings, and now there's a tent on the lawn and 140 people, and my father has announced Theo, like a docket, that the anniversary will double as," she read from the thick cream card in her father's voice, and even secondhand I didn't like his voice, "our long-awaited chance to welcome Iris's husband to the family." She put the envelope down on the step between us. "I'm going to tell them the truth," she said. "Obviously. I'm going to drive down there Saturday and stand on that lawn and tell 140 people that I invented a man because my actual life has never once been enough for them. And it's going to confirm every single thing they've said about me since I left law school. Poor Iris. Flighty Iris. The detour. They'll be kind about it. That's the worst part. The kindness is the knife." She breathed in, ragged, careful. 8 years building something real. And the headline will be that I lied about a husband. My mother will tell this story at Thanksgiving until the heat death of the universe. We sat in the fog. Deadbolt came out through the gap in my screen door, assessed the situation, and sat on my boot, which is the most he does for anyone. And I want to tell you exactly what happened in my chest right then, because it's the hinge the whole rest of my life turned on. I thought about 10,000 doors. I thought about how I'd stood outside this particular one for 3 years, respectful hands in my pockets, telling myself respect was the reason. And I thought, this once, the door isn't locked. You coward. She's sitting right here. The only thing between outside and inside is whether you'll say a sentence. What's his name? I asked. Iris looked at me. Your husband, the craftsman. He's got a name, presumably. You've been married a year. Her pale eyes did something complicated, fear and hope arriving at the same time like two fairies. Theodore, she said slowly. Theo, I never. When I said it at the wedding, it was the first name that, and then she stopped, because there it was, out in the fog between us, the fact of it. A year ago, cornered at a singles table, asked to invent the man who would finally choose her, Iris Whitlock had reached for the first name her heart had on file. Well, I said, when I could trust my voice. Then it sounds like I'm already invited. She argued, of course. For 2 days she argued in the alley over the dumpster, through the shared wall practically. It was insane. It was fraud. Socially, if not legally, she'd checked. She was a year and a half of law school, after all. Her father interrogated witnesses for 40 years for a living. Her brother-in-law Charles ran background checks on caterers. I would be walking into a tent full of people, professionally trained to find the seam in a story. And for what? For her vanity. For one dinner? No, Theo. Absolutely not. It was kind. It was the kindest insane offer anyone had ever known. On the third morning she unlocked at 7, and I unlocked at 8, and there was a coffee sitting on my doorstep with a note tucked under it that said in florist handwriting, "One dinner." Then we tell them the truth in the spring, gently, my schedule, my words. If you're sure. I was sure. I'd been sure for 3 years. She just didn't know the timeline. So we built him, my alter ego, Theodore the husband, and here's what I learned. You can't build a fake marriage without accidentally constructing a real intimacy, the same way you can't make a key without learning the lock. We had 3 weeks. We met every evening after close, in her shop, among the buckets and the cooler hum, with index cards, like students, and we learned each other. Logistics first. We kept everything true that could be kept true. That's tradecraft, she said. Lies are heavy, carry as few as possible. So, we met when I fixed her back door. True. Curted over sandwiches and window displays. True, I said, and she looked up from her index card for a second. Eloped last April at the courthouse in Rockland. False, but small. I'm a locksmith with my own shop. True. The cat is named Deadbolt. True. And her family would hate it. Bonus. Then the deep files, because spouses know things. Her coffee order, her shellfish allergy, that her grandmother Fern, the Anne Fern of the shop sign, was the only Whitlock who'd ever told her she was made right. My parents, the anniversary that never ended, Sam and Katie, the FAFSA years. She stopped taking notes when I told that part. She put the pen down and listened with her whole stillness, and at the end she said, quietly, "So you've already been a husband and a father. You just never got to be a groom." And I had to go stand in the cooler for a minute among the roses, because no one in 17 years had ever once said it back to me that clean. We practiced standing close. That sounds simple. It isn't. Married people stand inside each other's weather, she said. Her family would clock distance like bloodhounds. So we practiced self-conscious as 8th graders, her shoulder against my arm by the peonies, my hand at her back crossing the shop, until one Tuesday it stopped being practice and neither of us mentioned that it had stopped, which is its own kind of mentioning. The Saturday came down golden and merciless. I closed the shop, put on the gray suit I'd bought for Katie's wedding, and Iris came around the corner in a green dress the color of stems, her hair up with 2 real pins for once, and we looked at each other on Harbor Street like 2 people seeing the finished key for the first time. Last chance to be sensible, she said. I've been sensible for 36 years, I said. It's overrated. On the drive down she briefed me like a heist. Charles will test you on wine, don't play. Just say you're a beer man, own it. Webb will ask what you gross, deflect, he only respects evasion. Mother will be lovely, do not trust the lovely. And my father, she stopped, hands tight on the wheel, my father will wait. He lets the witness talk. The silence is the trap. Theo. Why are you smiling? Because I'd raised 2 teenagers, I told her. I'd survived 11 years of silences engineered by professionals. Judges were amateurs. The house was the kind of house that has a name. The tent on the lawn glowed like a landed moon. 140 people in black tie, a string quartet, and at the center of the receiving line, the Honorable Edward Whitlock, silver-haired, 6'2" of verdict, and Bitsy in pearls, scanning the drive. I watched Iris's spine change as we walked up, watched 8 years of armor come down over the woman who talked logistics to dahlias, and I did the only thing I could think of. I took her hand, not for the audience, for the hand. She looked at me sideways, and some of the armor turned back into skin. Mother, Daddy, this is Theo, my husband. I will spare you the full anthropology of that evening and give you the load-bearing moments. Bitsy was lovely, exactly as advertised, lovely like a frost. She kissed my cheek and said how marvelous, finally, and within 40 seconds had asked where I summered, weaponized as a verb. I said I worked summers, busiest season, tourists locked themselves out of everything, and she laughed the kind laugh, the knife one, and said, how useful, and filed me where she files staff. Webb shook my hand like a transaction, and asked what I drove. A 94 F-150, I said. He waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. He found that genuinely confusing and drifted toward the bar. Vivian, the surgeon, looked me over once, head to shoe, the full diagnostic, and said, so you're real. We had a pool going. Her husband Charles laughed, and didn't disagree, and his eyes never once stopped working, and I thought, there. That one. That's the lock that fights you. And Edward. Edward waited until dinner, the family table inside the big tent, 14 of us under chandeliers rented by the pound. He let the courses go by, let Bitsy conduct, let Webb monologue about markets, and then over the duck. Into a silence he manufactured the way I'd cut a key, he set down his fork and said, so, Theodore. A locksmith. Pause, the courtroom pause, the one that makes you fill it. I didn't fill it. I'd told Iris, judges are amateurs, but it's truer than that. Silence only traps people who are ashamed somewhere, and on the subject of my work, I have none. So we sat in his pause together, comfortably, me eating duck, until he finally had to do his own lifting. Tell me, in your trade, what does a man learn? The table went quiet. Iris's hand found my knee under the cloth. Patience, I said, and the difference between security and fear. Plenty of people buy locks because something happened once, and they never got over it. You learn to sell them the lock and not the fear. I let that sit a half second, looking pleasantly at nothing, and you learn that the most expensive doors usually have the cheapest hinges. Builders spend where people look. Edward Whitlock looked at me for a long moment, the way you'd look at a witness who just answered a different, better question than the one you asked. Down the table, the Chess grandchildren had stopped chewing. The judge said, which Iris told me later was by local standards a standing ovation. It almost worked. I want that on the record. We almost made it to the cake. But Charles, corporate counsel, the cheap hinge on that expensive family, had spent the cocktail hour on his phone, and somewhere between the duck and the toast he found what I could have told him he'd find, because Iris and I had decided, on the drive down, that there were lies we were not willing to engineer. No forged date, no fake rings bought aged. We had a story, not documents. And so when Edward rose, glass in hand, to make the toast Bitsy had scripted, the welcome of the long-awaited husband, Charles stood up first, phone flat in his palm like an exhibit, wearing the smile of a man about to bill the hour, and said to 14 Whitlocks, and the caterers and God. Quick question before the toast. Iris, sweetheart, why is there no record of your marriage in Knox County? Or any county in Maine? He turned the phone around, slow, savoring. Take your time. We've waited a year. The tent did that thing rooms do when something breaks, the silence with edges. Bitsy's hand went to her pearls. Webb actually smiled, the little brother smile of a man watching someone else take the fall for once. Vivian looked at Iris with what I can only call clinical interest, and Edward stood at the head of the table, glass still raised, motionless, while the toast died in the air above all that rented crystal. Under the tablecloth, Iris's hand was ice in mine. I felt the year of it move through her, the singles table, the kind laughs, the listings, the detour, all of it arriving at this exact ambush the way she must have always feared it would. And I felt the moment she decided. Her hand went still. Then it let go of mine, which frightened me, until I understood. She didn't want to stand up holding on to anything. Iris Whitlock stood up at her parents' 40th anniversary, in her stem green dress, in front of 140 people who could hear the silence from the dance floor, and she did not cry, and she did not run, and her voice, when it came out, was the voice she used on Flowers and Delivery Men: level, logistical, done. There's no record, she said, because there's no marriage. I invented a husband a year ago, at Caroline's wedding, at the singles table where you seated me, mother between a teenager and Uncle Roy. I stood up at that reception and I lied to 100 people. And do you know what I felt driving home? Relief. Because for the first time in 8 years, this family looked at me like I was finished. Like I'd finally completed the one assignment you ever gave me. She looked around the table, slow, taking attendance. I left law school 8 years ago. 8 years. I have built a business with my own hands. It has a payroll. It has never missed a rent payment. It put flowers on half the tables at this party tonight. Mother, you hired my shop through the planner. I know, I saw the order, and I did the work anyway. And I did it beautifully, because that's what I do. I do beautiful work. And not one of you has ever once driven 90 minutes to see it. Her voice didn't break. It did something harder than breaking. It leveled. You've called my whole life a detour for so long that I lied about a man rather than stand in front of you unfinished one more time. That's my confession. That's all of it. The marriage is fake. And that, God help me, is when I stood up too. The marriage is fake, I said. Nothing else about her is. Every face came around like a tide turning. Charles still had his phone out, and I have rarely wanted anything the way I wanted to feed it to him, but I'd promised myself, side by side, not in front of. Her fight. My foundation. So I kept my voice, the way I keep it for frightened people locked out of their own houses at midnight, which, when you think about it, was everyone at that table. My name is Theo Lang. I'm a locksmith from Saltbrook, and for 3 years my shop has shared a wall with your daughters. So I'm the witness here. I'm the one who's seen it. She's at the bench at 7 every morning. She does the books at midnight. On Valentine's Day, she works 13 hours and forgets to eat, and the whole town knows that if there's a funeral or a christening, or a girl who didn't get asked to the dance, Iris will have something at the door before you've thought to ask, and half the time there's no invoice. You seated her with the children. I looked at Edward then, because Iris had taught me. The silence is the trap, and I walked into it on purpose. Slow. Sir, you spent 40 years weighing evidence. The evidence has had a shop on Harbor Street for 8 years. The detour is the destination. She built it without a dime of this family's money and without an ounce of its respect, and only one of those was hard. I picked up my glass, because a toast had been promised and I keep promises. To 40 years. And to your daughter. The best thing I've ever watched anyone build, and I build things for a living. Nobody drank, that's fine. Toast aren't for drinking, they're for the record. Iris looked at me across that wreckage of a dinner, and in front of her entire assembled family, she started, of all things, to laugh. Not hysterics. The real one. The one that unserious A's her eyes. The Dahlia laugh, and she said, "You were only supposed to be the husband for one dinner." And I said, "I'm a craftsman. I over-deliver." And we walked out of the tent together, past the string quartet, past 140 people inventing the story in real time, out onto the dark lawn, unemployed as a married couple, free. We were quiet most of the drive home. Somewhere past Wiscasset, she pulled over at a closed lobster stand, killed the engine, and looked at the wheel for a while. "My whole life just burned down back there," she said. "Why do I feel like I finally got out of the building?" "Because you did." She turned in the seat. Fog on the windows, the ocean somewhere doing its patient thing. Theo. The name. A year ago, at that wedding, out of every name in the world. Her voice was careful now. A hand on a rail. "I've had a year to wonder why I reached for yours, and 3 weeks of index cards to be sure. So I'm going to ask you the witness question, and you're under oath. Was any of it practice for you? The standing close? Any of it?" "No," I said. "Not for 3 years." 3 years, she repeated, doing the arithmetic, and her eyes filled, and the foghorn went low and patient, the sound of this coast clearing its throat. "You never said a word. You fixed my door, and you brought me sandwiches, and you never once rattled the handle. I have too much respect for doors." My voice came out rough. "But Iris, you should know, before whatever you're about to, I'm not the interesting one here. I'm a locksmith with a cat. I raised my family already. I'm the quiet thing next door. Your mother filed me under staff in 40 seconds, and she wasn't entirely. She kissed me. In an F-150 at a dark lobster stand, 51 days before I turned 37, Iris Whitlock took my face in both hands and kissed me like a held breath finally let out, and when she pulled back an inch, she said, against my mouth, fierce as an invoice, "Don't you ever testify against my husband again." We did it properly after that, which is to say slowly, which is to say in the right order at last. We dated 2 doors apart, the worst kept secret in Saltbrook. The bait shop had a pool, the seagulls knew. In the spring she told her family the rest of the truth, her schedule, her words like she'd planned, except now the truth was gaining on the lie. And in June at the courthouse in Rockland, the one we'd invented, with Sam flown in from Denver and Katie 8 months pregnant and crying before anything happened, and Gus Linkfist, 90, as my best man and deadbolt at the shop under protest, Iris Whitlock married a craftsman. For real. She carried dahlias she grew herself. The ring I made at my own bench, brass core, because brass is what my hands know, and a band of gold around it, and inside, where only she can read it, I engraved the date of a wedding that never happened, the April elopement we never had, because, she said, that lie was the first true thing either of us managed to say. Her family came around the way ice goes out of a harbor, unevenly, with cracking sounds. Vivian thawed first, which surprised everyone. Surgeons respect results, and one August Saturday she turned up at the shop unannounced, watched Iris build a funeral piece in silence for an hour, and said on her way out, "You have better hands than I do," which in Whitlock is a love sonnet. Webb sent a wedding gift with no card, an espresso machine that costs what I gross in a month. We make cocoa in it. Bitsy took 18 months and a grandchild rumor, false, that time, to appear at Whitlock and Fern, where she touched every bucket like a customs inspection and finally said, "Your grandmother Fern would have liked this place," which is the closest that woman will ever come to the word sorry, and Iris took it, because you take the harbor as the ice leaves it. And Edward. The judge. One gray Tuesday in October, fog and ropes on Harbor Street, the bell over my door rang mine, not hers, and there he stood, 6'2" a verdict in a town car coat, looking at the wall of brass blanks like a man in a foreign country. He put an old strongbox on my counter. His father's, he said. Lost the key 40 years ago. Never got around to it. I opened it for him. It took 11 minutes. He watched every one of them, and inside there was nothing but letters, his parents' letters, and he stood there in my little shop reading one with his back very straight. At the door, he stopped. "She does beautiful work," he said, not looking at me. "I'm told you said that to my whole family." "I did, sir." "It needed a witness," said the Honorable Edward Whitlock, and put on his hat, and went 2 doors down to see his daughter's shop for the first time in 9 years. And through the shared wall I heard her say, "Daddy," in a voice I won't try to write down. People ask us how we met. Iris tells them the truth now, the whole ridiculous truth, the singles table, the invented husband, the index cards, Charles and his phone, the toast nobody drank. She tells it like a comedy, and it is one, now, the way a scar is a story once it's done being a wound. But when they ask me, I tell them what I know, which is locks. I spent 15 years opening other people's doors and calling the outside of them a life. 10,000 doors, and I never once knocked for myself, because I'd decided, somewhere back in the FAFSA years, that my turn had been spent on better things, and I wasn't even wrong, just early. And then a woman 2 doors down got cornered at a singles table, and reached for a name, and out of every name in the world, the one her heart had on file was mine. She'd been leaving the key under the mat for a year. The fake marriage lasted 1 dinner. The real one is the rest of my life. Some doors you respect. And some doors, if you're lucky beyond all deserving, get opened from the inside by a woman with stem sap on her hands, saying what she says to the dahlias and now says to me every morning, 2 shops with 1 wall, 1 house with 1 name on the box. You'll hold. And that's an order. I'll hold. 10,000 doors, and hers was the only one that was ever going to be home.